Okay, guys, welcome to my first episode of this new podcast. This is going to be a podcast where I'll bring on guests who challenge elements of our current capitalist model to create a more sustainable, a more equitable economy that essentially works for more people. So today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Ruth, who is the co-founder of HISBE. This is a supermarket that's looking to challenge the big incumbents of the world, the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, and bring a new business model. Ruth, thank you for being my first guest.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So I want to take this back to the start. So I came across you for a TED talk actually on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I saw right at the beginning, you were talking about how you were in this big corporate job before you started HISBE. So I want to understand what made you, when you're in this corporate job, what were the problems you saw with big supermarkets that kind of inspired you to take the step from this job to taking on this big mission?
Yeah. So I think you already know I did the same course as you, international business and modern languages. Back in the day, it was all about funneling you into the big corporates. So there wasn't really another option. It was all about, you do the 4 years and then you apply for the big corporates like Unilever and Procter and Gamble or Deutsche Bank or, a consulting agency. So I did all that and I joined the Unilever graduate scheme. And so I was 4 years at Unilever and then 8 years at Sara Lee and finally a short time at Procter and Gamble. And so I put myself on that path and I did 15 years of these corporate jobs. And it just got to the point where I actually had a funny moment. I was sitting on a balcony in Barcelona with a carver in my hand. And I realized with a horrible sudden insight that I wasn't happy. It was like, I'd kind of done all the things I was supposed to do. But I realized in that moment that there was no job satisfaction. I didn't have meaning at work. It was missing. And I was just kind of a bit of a slave to PowerPoint and Outlook and Word and Excel. So I had a rethink about what I wanted to do in that moment. And I'd spent a lot of time negotiating with big supermarkets as part of my job and kind of got to see their model. And, the big supermarket model is all about short-term profit and it works really well to get food all over the world in one place. But in my opinion, it's becoming obsolete because it relies on very cheap oil and very cheap labor and a globalized, industrialized food production system that's actually got a lot of sort of side effects that just aren't working anymore. So, it's making bad food normal, it's affecting health. We've got a massive impact on carbon and the climate change. So a third of all climate emissions are created by the food industry. And there's a tremendous amount of exploitation in the system and it's all supported by these great big global companies. And in my opinion, it has to change. It has to change for the future of food. So I got very interested in this idea of creating a supermarket how it should be, which is what HISBE business stands for. And it all started there really on a balcony in Barcelona.
That's great to hear. So with this job, this corporate job, what were kind of the specific points which you saw with the supermarkets that really got under your skin with how they conducted business?
Yeah. I think generally the way they treated you as a buyer. So I was from a big company, right? But they would talk to you like crap a lot of the time and play these games where you're waiting in reception, for every meeting for a long time. And then they'd slam the phone down on you. I mean, I've been called the C word on the phone and the phone slammed down because I didn't do what they wanted. It's like, you don't need that in your life. And it's just a kind of bullying. And I was with Unilever at that point and Sara Lee, some of the biggest companies in the world. So, if they talk to people from big companies like that, how are they treating little suppliers? So I never liked that aspect of it. And then there was a pivotal day where I was waiting for my buyer in the foyer of a big supermarket and he came bounding down the stairs in a good mood, which never normally happened. And I said, what's happened? And he said, I've just come out a really inspiring meeting. And I said, what? And he said, we've just realized we can save Tesco millions of pounds because we've just found out that the chicken in the chicken pies is too good. So they basically realized a supplier was putting grade A chicken into the economy chicken pies, and that if they made him downgrade the quality, they could sell the pies still at the same price but make loads more profit. And I just thought there's something wrong here. Like that's downgrading the quality of food for people on low incomes, and only in service of Tesco's profit. So, ever since that day, it just more and more stuff fell in place where I thought, I'm not sure I want to be part of this anymore. And more importantly, surely there's a better way. Surely there's a better way. When you spend £1 at the big supermarkets, only 9 or 10p makes it to the suppliers. It's mainly ends up, they export profit and they centralize profit to enrich shareholders, and they make billions in profit, but they underpay suppliers and they underpay staff, and it's just the wrong way round. I kind of umbrage with that. I thought, okay, it's a business, and you could argue that it's a business is a business and is only out to be a business, and that's fine. Or you could say, no, business can also have purpose, and that's what I set out to create.
Yeah, I guess that's a symptom of short-termism, isn't it? With the investors currently, they always want increased earnings per share every single quarter. So managers, they kind of lose this morality, and they just chase what's going to bring costs down, whether if that's at the expense of the environment or the community or whatever. So I think it's a pretty evil part of capitalism, which has gained momentum in the last recent couple of decades.
That's right. So we pay for stuff twice. We pay for it in the supermarket, and we also pay for it with all the side effects of it and the social and economic impact of supporting these great big companies that take so much from our community and from suppliers and from the earth. It's just not a sustainable model. It's just not, we can't go on this way. So I'm very passionate about just breaking that status quo, coming with other alternatives, joining up all the good people doing work in this area, and having another model that serves people and community instead of just big business.
Yeah, it's a way to go forward, in my opinion. So what was a specific moment where you thought, you know what, I'm going to leave and I'm going to take this challenge on? Was there one specific moment, or was it an accumulation?
Since those two pivotal moments, it was an accumulation. It was, and at the moment in Barcelona was the moment where I realized I'm going to leave and I'm going to do my own business. And then after that, it was research and conversations with my sister, who I founded HISBE with, and a series of conversations and thinking and looking at other models of business, particularly the body shop was big in that day, and I know it's big now, but it still had the founder, and it was very leading edge. So I was very inspired by Anita Roddick and Gordon Roddick's vision of a business built on values, as well as not just for money, So I kind of got inspired from lots of different sources, and it was a slow drip feed of thinking about this stuff and talking about it with my sister and creating something with her as we went along. We sat down and wrote our values, what was important to us in running a business, and we sat down and wrote the principles of the HISBE way, all way before we opened the shop, way before.
What were those principles?
Oh, so they were around, they still exist today, slightly reworded, but they're around local food, localism, seasonal sourcing, working in hand with nature, not against nature, minimizing waste, treating people with respect, charging and paying what's fair, and supporting ethics within business and fairness within business. So we've never deviated from those. They live very much in everything we do, and actually it's rewarded us now. I mean, 10 years in, recently, the Ethical Consumer magazine, I don't know if you know the Ethical Consumer magazine, but they're brilliant. They research, they take categories of products, everything from mobile phones to coffee, and they research all the brands out there and give them an Ethy score for their practices. And their practices, everything from labor laws to what they do with their profits. And we actually score number 2 best ethical supermarket in the country now, because of these values that we built 10 years ago,
That's amazing.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. It's been a crazy couple of years with the pandemic, but it's like
Yeah, of course.
we're still doing what we set out to do.
I guess what you're practicing is what they call now the triple bottom line, right? So not just profits, it's also people and planet. And what
Yeah,
I find interesting is you kind of adopted this a decade ago, and it feels like the triple bottom line is only kind of gaining momentum now in the
yeah.
last, I don't know, 2 years, like since the pandemic's kind of hit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, honestly, Sam, 10 years ago, no one wanted to do a
Yeah.
podcast talking about this stuff. It sounded weird. Like
Yeah.
Amy and I were like, no, there's this thing called social enterprise. There's this thing called running a business with values and love, and it's doing something for the planet. And everyone thought we were nutters. And it's not that bonkers. But like you say, in the last few years, it's all gained momentum and profile, and people are seeing. I think with the proliferation of information and social media, people are seeing the destructive practices of big businesses.
Yeah.
And then the generations, your generation, and a couple of generations, maybe a generation ahead of you, are doing something about it in the mainstream. So the very fact that we're having this conversation in your final year of uni, I did the same course 25 years ago, and there was no talk of anything like this.
Yeah.
That just shows me times have changed, and it's brilliant.
No, it's definitely changed. I think there's been lots of documentaries that have inspired people, lots of podcasts, lots of books, and I feel like we're at the cusp of things really starting to change. So yeah, it's exciting times ahead.
Exactly.
So
it is
regarding
HISBE, exciting business.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, we got a connection difference here because I'm out in Spain, you're back in Brighton. I was going to ask, how did you go about actually testing the business model to see if it was viable, to see if there was demand, to see if it would actually work?
Okay, so we did lots of stuff. We spent 3 years getting this first shop open. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And most of that was to do with finding the right location, to be fair. It was the middle of recession, and it took us a long time to find exactly the right shop.
Yeah.
But we also, we did a business plan with all the elements you'd expect, looking at customer and price and product. And but probably one of the most important bits of work we did was to look at the spend locally on food and drink. So we looked at our location. We got data that showed that every week there was a spend of £560,000 on food and drink. And we realized if we could just capture 2%, I think it was 2% of that spend coming in our doors, then we'd have a valid shop. And so there was stats like that, there was things like that. And the concept, we got the concept out there. We did a blog talking about the issues. We reached out to lots of people in person and online. In those days, Twitter was new. Like, it's hard to think about now, but we didn't know how to use Twitter. Like, no one did. But it was in its early days, and we used Twitter to link up with everyone in our sphere of people who cared about this stuff. And we built this following online through our blog and our social media. And it was clear what we stood for. So we were testing the concept all the time and talking about it all the time with people who cared. So by the time we opened that shop, we'd had a lot of thinking about it. And we'd also built a following. And most importantly, probably, was our crowdfunder. So again, I think we did one of the first crowdfunders. We raised 30 grand by selling money off vouchers for a shop that didn't exist yet. Which was hilarious, really, but we got the concept,
isn't it?
Yeah, I know. Now I say it's bonkers, but at the time we got the keys to the premises. We stood in the premises and we went, we're going to turn this into an ethical supermarket for everyone. It's going to be like this, this, and this. And if you love our concept and you think it's right for Brighton, buy money off vouchers. And we raised 30 grand that way. So that's proof of interest in our concept. And we used that crowdfunder, we leveraged that crowdfunder to raise more money from other people. So that was part of, kept testing the concept. And so by the time we opened the doors, we knew we had a really good following and people who had vouchers to spend in the shop.
Yeah, it's a really cool story of building a community before you actually open a business. I think there's lots of lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, we learned a lot, and we changed little things along the way and got to know Brighton because we didn't know Brighton well. We moved
Okay.
to start HISBE in Brighton
Yeah.
because we thought it was the right city. So we were getting to know Brighton over those 3 years and what people thought and what was already there, and it was a really interesting time.
Yeah, I guess Brighton's probably the perfect location to set up this kind of business model, because I guess Brighton's considered on the more liberal progressive spectrum. Exactly. I guess kind of a bastion of, I don't know, sustainable businesses. There's lots of sustainable businesses already in Brighton, so yeah, it's exactly. A good location choice.
Like we said, if it doesn't work in Brighton, it won't work anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just not ready, or it's not right.
So why did you opt for crowdfunding as a technique to raise capital?
Because we loved the idea of a democratic offer, an offer that was the same for everyone, and we've continued this way. So we love the idea.
Okay.
Whether you had 50 quid or 500 quid or £2,000 or 50, you could get the same offer.
Yeah.
And when we opened our second shop, we did a much bigger crowdfund. We crowdfunded £450,000 through Triodos Bank, and we crowdfunded a loan. So we pay back people. We'll pay back this loan in a few years' time. But whether you had 50 quid to put in or 10 grand or 50 grand, because we had a couple of people put in 50 grand, you get the same deal. And so we love the idea of being propelled by a big group of people all sharing the risk, rather than one big lender, rather than a big bank giving us the money. It's all about lots of people having a piece of it, and lots of people having access to the same offer. So it's important when you run an ethical business or you set it up that way, it's important whoever gives you money has a say. And so you're choosing who you're going to be kind of in hoc to, if you like. So we choose our lenders carefully. We choose people who care about social value, or we take it to a crowd who all put in a bit of money.
Okay, makes sense. I guess, was there a part of you which didn't actually want an investor on board? Because with investors, as we already discussed, you get these short-term pressures, and I think it's changing now, but traditionally investors don't really align with social values. They're all just short-term profits now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the big VCs and banks are like that. They won't, if you owe them money, you owe them money, and they want their money, and that's it. But we have found social investors, even at the beginning, we found people who, yes, they were putting money in, but they were equally interested in the social value we were creating. And, we've continued to this day to not, we've always found those people who, instead of expecting 8, 9, 10% return, they're happy with 3, 4, 5, and you deliver social value. And in times where we've had tough times and money's been tight, we've been able to go back and talk to these people and go, look, can we postpone our repayment to you for a year or 6 months? And they've always been accommodating because they can see that we're delivering the social value. So if you choose your investors carefully, and who you want, how you bring money into the business is important.
Of course. So digging more into the business model itself, how would you go about choosing suppliers?
Okay, so we set out the rules for how it should be in each category, with a view to supporting sustainability. So, for example, fruit and veg. To support a sustainable food system, a resilient local food system, you source as locally as possible. So very early on, we went, okay, fruit and veg, if it can be local, it should be local. And we support as much local farming as possible. And if it can't be local and we need to still sell it, like potatoes aren't great here, like some of the root vegetables we get from Kent. So if it can't be local, it's British. If it can't be British, like avocados and bananas, maybe one day we won't sell avocados and bananas, but if we didn't sell them today, people would literally walk out. So our avocados and bananas have to be fair trade and organic. So we kind of create the rules for each product category, and they're different for different product categories, but that's fruit and veg. And then we went out to find the suppliers that fit those rules. One of the interesting things we do actually is with brands. So, everything from breakfast cereal to toothpaste to tinned beans, we use the Ethical Consumer magazine, the index that I mentioned earlier, Any brand on our shelves must score 10 or more on the ethical consumer index. So that's helped us choose brands.
Yeah.
And the average supermarket brand scores 5 or less. So there's a distinction there between what we do and what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting because for the last, I guess, 30, 40 years, we kind of globalized and we sourced everything from different countries. They're kind of flipping that model on its head and going, okay, let's internalize this and let's source more locally. Do you think that's the way the economy should be moving forward?
Absolutely. I think for the future of food and farming, it is absolutely crucial to move to localized, resilient food systems.
Yeah.
You know, you only got to look at what's going on in Russia and, you know, what big oil and what big oil does to the world. And, you know, we are going to get to a point where we can't finance and afford the system that we've got, you know, can't afford it literally and can't afford it from all the impacts it has. So localism is absolutely key. You know, we should just be eating what's on our doorstep plus a few other bits. And so it wouldn't surprise me if in 50 years we were not in this country eating bananas and avocados, and that's fine. We'll be all right.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to approach it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's definitely a more sustainable option.
It's exactly. It's more sustainable and it's better for the economy. You know, if you spend your money with local suppliers and farmers, you can get a better product and you have a fraction of the food miles. Most likely, if you're working with medium-sized or small suppliers, you've got a fraction of the environmental impact of them farming, because small guys don't use the same prolific, you know, fertilizers and antibiotics and all of that stuff. So you've got a better product that's better for people and better for environment. So localism is key, and for biodiversity and soil health and all kinds of other reasons.
Yeah, of course, I understand. I also wanted to ask, when it comes to, especially when you started with business, were there any particular trade-offs you had to make between, I don't know, profit, people and planet? So kind of a triple bottom line. Was there at times, I know as a startup, sometimes you have cash flow problems. Is there a time you had to prioritize perhaps the profit element at the expense of the sustainability element?
I can think of one time during COVID. So when we launched our shop, we launched a plastic-free section, which was all loose, and you see them out now. But at the time, it was really unusual, to the point where the store designer tried to persuade us not to do this. But we were selling rice and pasta from the dispensers, and they said, no one's going to buy that shit. It's unhygienic. No one's going to buy stuff loose ever. And we were like, no, we're pretty sure that it works better to have it loose. So over the years, it's really grown. And we got to the point where we had shifted loads of products from plastic packaging into the loose goods section. But during COVID, people went back to wanting plastic covered stuff. So there was a weird time. There was one time I can think of where we have compromised our values, because people were rushing into the shop. There was panic buying, and they wanted pasta in plastic and big packets, and they wanted big things of loo roll. And so there was a point there where we went back to plastic packaging. And on the cafe, we have a small cafe takeaway. We were putting stuff in packaging that we hadn't done before. So yes, there's an example there of. And that we had to keep going, you know, we had to keep going, and we had to give customers what they wanted during that time. I mean, we don't do that anymore, but there was a point in time there where we did compromise some of the stuff that we care about.
Yeah, it's difficult. You can't always prioritize just for sustainability and the community element. There are going to be times when you have to look after the business itself, and if there's external shocks like the pandemic. So it's I think it's,
and people have to be ready. Yeah, customers have to be ready for it. Like, I'll give you another example. We do sausages from a farm up the road. They're brilliant, high quality, high welfare sausages, 98% meat, which is completely unheard of. And he's always done them in shrink wrapped plastic packaging. And we did a little project with him to look at alternative packaging. We looked at these grease-proof paper. So really nice paper, much more sustainable, much better quality. And I put a post up on social media going, we're changing all our sausages to this packaging. Don't they look great? And everyone went, yeah, this is epic. We love it. They look great. And then when we launched them, the sales of sausages just went through the floor. Like no one bought them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the reason for that was they couldn't see the sausages because they're covered in paper. And people like being able to see the sausages through the plastic.
Yeah.
So in that case, we went, oh, we've gone too far. We've gone too far for our customers at this point. So my hope is that one day those sausages will be in much better packaging. But at the moment, it's too much for customers. And you have to bring people along with you and start where they are. Like if people aren't ready for that, they're not ready for that. They won't buy it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. You've looked up and down the value chain essentially and said, where can we improve? Is there something you think businesses should be taking more responsibility, is looking up and down, not just focusing on their core business, but actually, looking at other players in the network?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things we do is we've got these eight areas where we look at improvement, and 8 areas that make up the HISBE way. And we help other businesses like ours do that. So we encourage everyone to look at our 8 areas and work with them. One of them being low waste, and we talk about never throwing away food that can be eaten, recycling as much as possible through the shop. We have an 84% recycling rate, which is really high.
Wow.
And avoiding plastic packaging and saving plastic. So I think we've saved 880,000 bits of plastic since we started by selling stuff loose.
That's amazing.
So we go out and we say, take our 8 things and do them.
Yeah.
We want people to copy them. We want people to use them in their business. And that, like you say, if food businesses look at those 8 things, they're going to find elements of it that they can use up and down the supply chain to identify more sustainable, fair, and ethical ways of doing things.
No, I agree. Definitely. I think there's so much that can be taken away from that for a bigger company. I think I'm actually reading a book right now. It's called Net Positive, and it's written by the former CEO of Unilever, I believe, actually. And this is a concept he's talking about, is, looking up and down the chain and seeing where we can increase efficiencies and essentially try and create this circular economy where waste is minimized, and in the end, it actually helps drive down costs as well. So I think it's a really important point we need to pursue. So
I agree.
I was also going to ask, do you think, in the eyes of some managers, they kind of view CSR and sustainability as almost like a burden. Do you think sustainability is actually a competitive advantage?
It depends on the product category that you're in and the business that you're in. In our business, it's a competitive advantage because some people are looking for it. So we've got an Aldi, 10 seconds walk. We've got a Sainsbury's and a Co-op on our road, and we have to compete with those guys.
Yeah.
And they bring the footfall customers in. They bring customers in, and we nick some of their business, basically. And we have to have ways of competing with them and offering them something completely different. And the things that we compete on are our ethics. We're ethics led, local suppliers, low waste, sustainable options, and a community spirit, a really nice vibe in the shop. It's a nice experience, not like dragging yourself around an Aldi. So we're very clear on what we need to do to have a competitive advantage. And yes, I think that in many categories it can be a competitive advantage. It's just that in some categories people maybe aren't ready for it yet. So we're still early on in the mass adoption of these principles in food. We're still right at the beginning. And when I die, I will know that I've planted a seed. I don't think we'll have achieved all the things I would love to achieve by the time I go, but I know that I'll have planted seeds that are going to grow over my lifetime, so that one day this stuff is normal. And that's happening in every industry, but not, in my opinion, not fast enough. But yeah, it's where they get it right, it's a competitive advantage, but still only really can be adopted by people who've got money and choice. Yeah,
I agree. At the moment, it does feel quite niche, doesn't it? But I feel like right now it's all about trailblazing a path and showing people that this can actually be done. And then in turn the masses will come.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think in the last 5-10 years, for big supermarkets, for Sainsbury's, for Tesco's, do you think they've actually improved in their sustainable practices? Or do you think there's been lots of greenwashing and lots of PR campaigns?
There's been both. So, they're both acute. They're all acutely aware that people are interested in this area and all these trends are growing. This is how they see it. And that people ask what they're doing. But there's not enough people doing that yet to force them to do it big time. But they know if they tinker around the edges and do a few things that it'll keep people quiet. So some of it's great. Like, I think obviously the supermarkets create an enormous amount of waste. So they will overorder everything, particularly fruit and veg. If it looks lush and abundant, it drives sales. So they want to buy that stuff as cheap as possible and throw stuff out at the end of it. Because it's better to do that than have gaps in the shelves. So they've created an incredibly wasteful way of doing fruit and veg. But what's good now is that they have found ways of giving away that fruit and veg to local small organisations who put it to good use. So whilst they create a ridiculous amount of food waste, they are finally in the last 5 years starting to do useful things with that food waste. They used to sue people. If food waste was in a bin out the back of Sainsbury's and you go in the bin to get it, they would sue you. But now Sainsbury's will give the food to a group that does something useful with it for homeless people, or just turning it into meals or redistributing it. And those schemes are great. They should be doing that, and they are doing those things. But they're also tinkering around the edges. There's a good example in Iceland. They decided to take the plastic off the bananas, which is amazing because bananas don't need plastic on them.
No.
And they trialed it, I think, for 8 weeks and then put all the plastic back on because not enough people bought it. So that's the example of they need to see short-term returns on anything they do.
Yeah.
So they're not going to make a big switch like that if it makes sales go down. And that's the issue. Whereas we're built like that from the beginning. Yeah. They have to deliver, as you say, they have to deliver more and more and more every year in profit and in sales. So they'll trial stuff and then pull it if it doesn't work.
So on that point, what do you think needs to change, maybe on the holistic level, for these big supermarkets to go, you know what, we're going to scrap the short-termism element and we're going to practice more sustainable methods? What is the switch that's going to make them be more green?
Well, the switch would be a big challenge to their own business model where they take responsibility. So at the moment, they externalize all these costs to everyone else, externalizing, for example, as taxpayers, we subsidize the supermarket's wage bills because they underpay people, and we top up the wages through our tax credits. So the taxpayers pay money to Tesco employees that Tesco should be paying to them. And that's just one example of all the ways that they externalize cost. If they took responsibility for the true costs, and they said, okay, this year, when we make our £2 billion profit, we're not going to give half of that to shareholders. We're going to give a quarter of that to shareholders, because what we're going to do is we're going to spend the other quarter on this scheme and that scheme and the other scheme, because we recognise we need to take responsibility and stop externalising costs. So we're going to tackle wages, and we're going to take that quarter and give it to people so they can have a fair wage. And we recognise also by paying people properly, we won't get so many sick days and we'll have happier employees, and maybe we can move to a 4-day week, and that creates more loyalty for our business. So, but that all takes a midterm approach, not a short-term approach. But that's what would need to happen. Someone innovative goes in there and says, do you know what, we'll just pay out 250 million less this year to shareholders and we'll do something else with it.
Yeah, I agree. Because you can end up creating this virtuous circle. But I just think it's going to take a couple of decades, to be honest, because I think it needs people from my generation or this younger generation who are more passionate about this kind of stuff to get into the positions of power to actually make this change. Because I don't think there's much chance of convincing a CEO who's in their 60s, in their 70s, who's knows one way of business. I'm not sure if you can change their thinking. So Yeah, I'm hopeful it will
Yeah,
change,
I mean,
but
I agree. I think it's up to my generation. In my generation, we're trying to sow these seeds.
yeah.
Like there are loads of people doing this stuff. They've done the corporate treadmill. They've gone, hang on a minute, there's something else out here that's more important. They're sowing these seeds, and we pass the baton down to the following generations, who will then hopefully tip it into the mass market and take this to big companies and become CEOs. Because you're right, it's not a fast thing, and it's not something that I see my generation being able to tip into the masses, but maybe your generation can, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, we see how it pans out.
Yeah.
Going back to HISBE, do you think this is a model that could be rolled out at scale? I believe you have 2 supermarkets now. Is it one in Brighton, one in Worthing? Is
That's
this
right.
something you could envisage being rolled out at scale across the country?
What we want to do is roll out scale regionally, if you like. So we want to create a regional chain in Sussex, maybe of between 5 to 8 stores, and an online offer, and get it right in one region. So we figure out all the things that we don't know yet about replicating, get a really solid chain of stores that are symbiotic and regional in Sussex. And because decentralization is important, one of the big problems with supermarkets, they're so centralized, all the power centralized, all the profits centralized. The store managers have very little power to, run something in service of the community. And we want to turn that on its head. So we create a regional chain that's embedded in the community, that supports localism, that supports local farmers and puts money into the local economy. And then we help other people in other regions do it there. So, we are building a replication tool that in 5 years, say, when we've got our chain, we can help people in Cardiff and in York and in Bristol and do the same there. And that's the model. So we're not trying to expand in the normal way where it's us that do it, because there'll be different opportunities in different regions. I wouldn't be surprised if the big supermarkets don't all make it, because there's not really room in the market for all of them. So you might find a situation where Sainsbury's decides to sell off or get rid of all its small chains, all its small stores in, say, Swansea. And then you've got a community in Swansea who might go, do you know what? We could turn these into HISBE stores. And, we collaborate on making them HISBE stores for Swansea, but it would come from the locals because it needs to be locally sourced. It needs local knowledge. And that's what we're trying to do, Sam, is create our HISBE way and make it work in one region, and then help other people democratically launch it in their regions.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice idea. It's about, I guess, cultivating a culture at the end of the day.
Yeah. And the other thing we do, like I said, is we help other people follow in our footsteps. So I help other people do what we've done, or elements of it that they want to do. So we're almost like consultants. We help kind of people do elements of what we've done. So, someone might come and say, I've got a small shop, I'm worried about the range, I think we could be selling something different, or I don't know how to do a cash flow forecast, or we've got this problem or that problem. And I help them with those problems, because we're not going to transform the food system on our own. It needs a lot of people to copy us, and it needs a lot of people to follow in our footsteps.
Yeah, I remember reading a few days ago, actually, that you have this consulting role where you help with social impact entrepreneurs. Am I right?
Yeah.
So how did this all come about? When did it start?
So I started specifically, I've always mentored people to do what we do, but specifically in 2018, I founded the Good Business Club, co-founded it with my friend Sarah Osterholzer. And we created that because in the beginning, Amy and I, my sister and I, we spent 3 years trying to get it off the ground, and we didn't really know where to go for support. And we thought we had to do it all ourselves. And we had, some real naysayers in the beginning saying it couldn't work and it was dumb. And so we did too much on our own. And I recognized that we need to build something for people like us to find their tribe. And so I founded the Good Business Club to help people like that, who are trying to create and run and grow purpose-led businesses, but it's a struggle on your own. No one creates lasting impact on their own. And so the club's all about bringing people together to collaborate on things, and it's very focused. So, you know, at our networking events, most of them online now, you have an ask and you have an offer. You say, I've got a real problem finding new customers for my Worthing store. Does anyone here have some marketing expertise? They can work on this with me. And then you have an offer. You say, I'll give all of you on this call 10 money off vouchers for my store to incentivize your staff to give us a reward. So you go with an asker and an offer, and you swap and collaborate skills. And that's been really, really strong and successful and created a lot of impact. So that's the way forward. This collaboration piece is really, really important.
I think that's really important what you're doing, because being an entrepreneur is hard enough. And being a social impact entrepreneur is like having a busload on your shoulders. So
exactly.
I think it's a really good idea, because social entrepreneurship, it's something that's personally, in my opinion, probably a lot harder than normal entrepreneurship, because you're not just looking after your profits, you're trying to look after your community, the whole value chain, whilst not screwing the planet over at the same time.
Exactly. It is hard. And the other thing about the club is there's a lot of people in it who are supporters. So they might not be doing their own business, but they are accountants or lawyers or HR specialists or coaches, and they aren't going to create their own business, but they're passionate about helping the people that are. So they give their services pro bono or free or collaboratively or cheaper. They just want to work with purpose-led entrepreneurs. So it's very important for purpose-led entrepreneurs to not only connect with each other, but pull in the resources from all those willing people who want to help them. And there are always good people out there. There are always good people that want to help if you get your vision out there and you're clear about what you need, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Have you felt the sentiment change in the last 2 years then? Have you felt like there's more momentum behind this?
Yeah, I felt there's more momentum. I think there's increasing dissatisfaction with the way big companies run. I think there's a big worker dissatisfaction with working for these big companies. I think people are wanting to use their talents for purpose-led and values-led enterprises. And there's more and more interest from shoppers and customers and consumers. So yeah, I do, particularly in the last 2 years through COVID. I mean, our membership jumped. We took all our stuff online with a Good Business Club, and we've got people from all over the place engaged in it. And there does seem to be this wave of interest that I've been waiting for 10 years. And it's starting now. We're right at the beginning of the wave of it.
Yeah,
I think, and the arc of it is just going to go more and more over the next few decades.
No, it's super exciting. Very important. Moving on, I got 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. I'm conscious of your time. Looking at it from a holistic point of view, how much of the onus do you think is on government versus business to create this sustainable, more circular economy?
I think government is critical and just don't do anywhere near enough. Look, we've got the UN sustainability goals. They've been created, a really solid piece of work that talks about all these goals that we need to hit by 2030. All of the countries are supposedly signed up to them, and none of them are doing enough. So yeah, it is the government's job to stand by these bloody sustainability goals and implement them, and they're not. So
why do you think that is?
No good thing. I think it's because they're so short-termist and because big companies are so powerful. So the current institution is so powerful that it prevents change. But it is the government's job to find a way. And the social enterprise world is demonstrating increasingly a massive impact on the economy. You know, social enterprises outpace growth and innovation and diversity in so many sectors versus regular SMEs. You know, we're demonstrating our companies are more successful. So it is the future, and localism is the future, and they must know that. So yeah, it's going to take one hell of a big shift, but it is the government's job. And you know, people like Caroline Lucas in the Green Party just keep hammering them on this stuff and highlighting. It's really important that we campaign and we stay vocal on all this stuff, because it's all too slow, and it needs to happen. I mean, some governments are more effective than others. So in France, they're banning plastic covered fruit and veg, for example, which is brilliant. And, you know, it's that sort of intervention which is going to have an impact. But it takes guts and commitment and someone to be unpopular, and politicians don't like being unpopular, do they?
No, I agree, definitely. Yeah. So I guess the last question to wrap up for today, Ruth, is what is your definition of a purpose of a business?
The purpose of a business?
Yeah.
Of my business?
Of business in general in 2022.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so if we go back to the 1970s, for example, there was a famous economist who said, he was called Freeman, he said the purpose of a business is to maximize profit.
Yeah.
What would you say the purpose is now in 2022?
I think the purpose is to maximize responsible contribution or responsible growth. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a really good way of framing the shift in business. There needs to be an adoption of this idea that a business isn't an island. It only works because people make it work, and community makes it work, and we're all rewarding bad behavior. So yeah, I think that, you know, business has a response, you know, the purpose of business should be responsible, making a responsible contribution to society. And alongside that, you know, part of that responsible contribution is money, that they create jobs and that they create value, and they pay suppliers, and they, you know, foster money in the local economy, which is what a regular business does. But on top of that, take responsible growth implies that you don't just carry on doing unsustainable, you know, practices, and that you take on another level of responsibility in the business.
No, I agree. That's I think that's probably what my answer would be as well. So
okay.
Ruth, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been really insightful. I think there's super useful information to come out of this conversation. To anyone listening, I'm going to leave links to HISBE down in the description below, and also a link to Ruth's TED Talk, which I thoroughly recommend to anyone to listen to, because again, it's super insightful. So Ruth, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and being my first guest.
Thank you, Sam. It was a pleasure. Thank you. I could talk about this stuff all day. Thank you.
Thank you.